you so much, guys. I'm going to get them a guitar case, and we're going to Dollar Tree this afternoon, and we're going to make some money. We're going to be out in the parking lot. If you were to flash back to 1944, and for some of you, you're thinking, man, that's when I retired. Anyway, 1944, there was a man named Donald Gardner. He was a music teacher, married also to a music teacher, and his wife was sick, and he was filling in for her in her second grade class in Smithtown, New York. It was just before Christmas, and as part of the day, just kind of biding time, had each of the students in the class stand up and say what it was that they wanted for Christmas. And as all these little second graders are standing and telling what they would like to get for Christmas, he noticed something. Out of 22 of them, 16 of the 22 were missing at least one of their front teeth. That led him to write these lyrics. Everybody stops and stares at me. These two teeth are gone, as you can see. I don't know who just to blame for this catastrophe, but my one wish on Christmas Eve is as plain as can be. All I want for Christmas is my two front teeth. Gee, if I could only have my two front teeth, then I could wish you a Merry Christmas. You know, it's possible that you will or have already heard that song played on the radio. Maybe it was Nat King Cole singing it. Perhaps it was the Chipmunks. Maybe it was just playing along in your mind. I don't know. But that song, and we've been thinking over these past few weeks about some of the songs that we hear at Christmas. That is one that you will hear. All I want for Christmas, in that case, is my two front teeth. It's likely that there are those that have been asking you and pleading with you, please tell me something that I can get you. What is it you would want for Christmas? You're asking your spouses that, your parents that, your children that, your grandchildren. You're asking that question. And I was thinking about stuff that I have wanted for Christmas. And when I think about stuff that I've wanted for Christmas, I think about what I wanted as a kid growing up. And I don't know if it was third or fourth grade, but I remember one of the things, my must-have that particular year was the Keystone XR 308 110 camera with telephoto zoom. Ooh, got it. I think it was the next year or so, I wanted, it was a 3-channel CB walkie-talkie. So I got my first CB radio when I was 4th or 5th grade. Sixth grade. I remember it was a particularly cold Christmas that year, but I got what I wanted. I was desperately wanting a 10-speed, and I got a 10-speed, and I remember it was so cold that year, but it's one I don't have frostbite scars to this day from spending all of Christmas riding that bike outside. But then later, my appetite had been whet for CB radio stuff, and so then I wanted, and I got a CB base station. That was really cool. Anyway, but the Keystone XR 308 110 camera with built-in flash and telephoto zoom, the 3-channeled CB walkie-talkie radio, the Galaxy 10-speed bike, and the CB base station, I got none of it. None of that do I have. All I wanted for Christmas back then were those things, but to this day, I have none of those things. What I really wanted, so desperately was thinking about, to this day, I still have nothing. Well, why is that? Because I did not hang on to any of those things. I did not hang on to any of those things. That leads me to pose a question for you today to think about, and that's this. What is it that you should hang on to? What is it that you should treasure from Christmas, from the coming of Jesus into the world? What is it that you not only could, but should hang on to, that you should treasure from the coming of Jesus? We see the answer to that question in Luke chapter 2. If you would look with me in your Bibles there today, Luke chapter 2, and we're going to start with verse 16. Luke chapter 2, starting with verse 16. We looked at a chunk of this last week, but we're going to look at it from a different angle today. Luke chapter 2, starting with verse 16. We're told that's the shepherds, they hurried off and found both Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. After seeing them, they reported the message they were told about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary was treasuring up all these things in her heart and meditating on them. Then the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had seen and heard, which were just as they had been told. Pay attention to what you see in verse 19, where it says that Mary was treasuring up all of these things in her heart. That says, with the coming of Jesus, that she was holding on to something. And in the years to come, when there would be celebration of the fact that Jesus had come, there was still something she was clinging to. And I believe her example reminds me and informs each of us what it is that as followers of Jesus, those who know not simply that He came, but His purpose and intent in coming, what is it that we should hang on to? What is it we should treasure about the coming of Jesus into the world? Well, based on what we see here with Mary, the first thing we need to do is this. We need to treasure what has been said about Jesus. We need to treasure what has been said about Jesus. Obviously, this comes to us in the 2nd chapter of Luke, which is our most well-known, often quoted description of Jesus' entrance into the world. And after Jesus has been born, on that same night, we looked at this last week, an angel appears to some shepherds who were just out in the countryside doing what they normally would have been doing on any old ordinary night, dealing with their flock. Bedding them down an ordinary night until an angel shows up. And we noted how it is that it was unusual that shepherds would be a part of this story. After all, they were deemed by many to be an untrustworthy, just kind of lesser than group in society. Certainly not those that were the who's who and not the upper echelon of society. They were just so ordinary, so plain, just working class people. But it was to these plain, ordinary men that an angel showed up and said, hey, today there is born unto you in the city of David, that's Bethlehem, a Savior. It's Christ the Lord. And the language that he uses, describing using the word Christ, that's messianic talk. And so these shepherds would have understood that an angel, a messenger from God, is saying, hey, the one that we've been looking for, the Messiah that we've heard about for millennia, has finally shown up, has been born tonight. And as they hear that, they're informed also about some details. That this baby is born in Bethlehem. It's in a manger, which is a food trough for an animal in a stable. And it's going to be wrapped in just swaddling cloths. Not in a palace, not in royal robes, but in a food trough wrapped in just rags. They hear this. And then all of a sudden there's a multitude of angels that this angelic choir is all of a sudden singing. And after all of these angels have disappeared, the shepherds said, hey, let's go to see what we've heard about. And so we've gotten this message, let's go check it out for ourselves. And so that's where we pick up in verse 16. It says, they hurried off and they found Mary and Joseph and they find the babe that was lying in the manger. Now, this is a small thing, but it is not incidental. Pay attention to the detail here. That this could not, and it was not a fluke that they just happened to show up on that particular night and to find a baby being born under these circumstances. Even if this was not Jesus, God the Son, how many, even in that day, when their child was born, would say, hey, let's go to a stable? I mean, some of you were asked if you were raised in a barn, but I don't think any of you were born in a barn, right? So in the first century, you would have been looking for at least a clean place, not where animals are, not where hay is, not where goats and sheep and horses and all that and all the smell. You don't want that for your little baby. And yet it was exactly in that circumstance, which they had been told about, that they found him. And who would be putting their baby in a farm animal's food trough? I mean, so this is not coincidence. This is not fluke. This is God saying to the shepherds through the angels, hey, this is what has happened. And then they go and they see, man, exactly what we have heard. This is exactly what we have seen and witnessed. And so we're told that when they found this babe lying in a manger, verse 17 says, after seeing them, they reported the message they were told about this child. Now, who did they tell this to? Well, it's got to be at least Mary and Joseph. Likely there were probably some others that were around maybe that night going to check on their animals. Perhaps some people, but again, because Bethlehem is packed at this point, anybody that would listen to them, they would have probably said, hey guys, you're not going to believe what has happened to us tonight. And going through all of this that they had heard and been foretold to them by the angels, and how they found this baby just like he had said, they had been told. And then verse 18 says, all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. All of them were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. Now, while Luke tells us that people were amazed, honestly, I'm guessing, in truth, that what people might have demonstrated as amazement was courtesy. Oh, that's really special. You might do that on Christmas morning when you get something that you don't like. Ooh, that's nice, real nice. My guess is most people probably weren't that amazed. In fact, this is probably what they were thinking. This is why you don't trust what shepherds say. They say screwball things. They say things that you just can't believe, that you just can't trust. In the presence of the shepherds, that's wonderful. But I bet their amazement was just courteous indifference. I say that not only based on suspicion, but based off of a clue that you get here. And it's with the word but, which is an adversative conjunction. The goal is to establish a contrast. Because it says, but Mary was treasuring up these things in her heart. It seems that Luke is being intentional in communicating that the response of Mary and how she received everything that they had said was very different than how any and everybody else did. My guess is that while they might have paid lip service in terms of amazement, oh, that's wonderful, Mary was taking all of this in, making mental note. It wasn't passive indifference. I think she was intentionally mindful. This is all part of some amazing thing that God has been doing and that I've got a front row seat to. And I believe what Luke tells us is important. She holds on to this. She treasures. But what does she treasure? She is treasuring what has been said to her about this one that she is holding. Now, her experience is not the experience of the shepherds. She had her own experience. Nevertheless, what has been heard by her from the shepherds, what the shepherds say that God has let them in on and has let them experience by virtue of this message from the angel and then coming to see Jesus, that's the shepherd's experience, and they share this. And what they are saying and what they describe that the angels have said about this little boy that she is now holding, all of that she holds on to. Pay attention, it's not her experience. She is instead treasuring what has been said about Jesus. That leads me to ask you this simple question. Why is it you would hold on to something? To anything? Some of you may say, because I'm married to it, but in a more general sense, why would you hold on to something? Let me answer it this way. Those of you who are parents, you have either had recently or years ago an experience such as this, where you tell your kids to go clean up their room, and how they clean up their room, well, you're not surprised by, but you're also not pleased by, because standard operating procedure for a kid to clean up their room involves what? A whole lot of cramming. Well, there's all this stuff in the floor. Let's cram it in the closet. Let's cram it under the bed. Let's cram it into the drawers. Let's just kind of get it out of sight. And so we've been playing that game for a while, in particular with the boys downstairs, to say, hey, these rooms are a mess. These rooms are a mess. You need to clean them up. And so we realized it needed some more attention. And so a week ago this past Friday, the kids were at their homeschool co-op, and so Caroline and I go downstairs, and we're going to deal with this stuff. And so I'm in Philip's room, she's in Andrew's room, and I am in this closet. And I'm reminded again that it's not just him, but particularly Philip is a hoarder. He just is. And so if you have any garbage, he would love to have it. Just anything you might throw out, just give it to him. He'll hold on to it. He will treasure it for Christmas. Anyway, but there is all of this stuff that is in his closet, that's under his bed, it's just junk. But he's held on to it. He's held on to it. But this is not the first time we've done this. I remember having gone through his closet one time before to clean up some stuff, and in his closet there was a trash bag. Inside the trash bag was the cast they had cut off of his arm when he had broken his wrist. What happened to that cast? It went in the trash can. Why? Because that stinky old nasty cast lacks two things: value and use. Value and use. In the end, isn't that why we discard things? We discard things that have, for us, neither value or use. Mary holds on. She treasures what has been said about Jesus. Why? Because what has been said about him has both value and use. I've got to think that at some point in the future, perhaps on a day when Jesus seemed to be such an ordinary one-year-old, an ordinary toddler just learning to walk, that she would need to play in her mind what had been said about him. Unto you in the city of David there is born unto you a Savior who is Christ the Lord. And this little guy that's taking his first steps. There's more to the story. Everything that seems so ordinary is not at all ordinary. Well, what does this have to do with me, and what does it have to do with you? I think it's simple, but it's encouraging you to make sure that you really, really value what it is that has been told us about Jesus, God the Son. That as you read in the prologue of John's Gospel, that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and that we beheld His glory. The glory is of the only begotten, full of grace and truth. That this one that was God the Son came and He pitched His tent. He dwelt among us. That's a big deal. Hold on to that statement that the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, because it's a reminder to you that Jesus, God the Son, came into this world not stained by the sin that I am stained with. That we need to hold on to the truth that was given by Simeon to Mary in this same chapter in verse 34, that this child will be destined for the falling of many and the rising of many, that this one that has been born, this one who has come, that how people respond to him is going to determine and be determinative of whether they experience a rising or a falling. We need to hold on to those things that have been said to us, that have been revealed to us about Him, because they have both value and use. Treasure what has been said about Jesus. But there's another thing you need to treasure, and that's this. Treasure what you have experienced with Jesus. Treasure what you have experienced with Jesus. Look with me down in the same chapter. You might have to turn the page. Look down to verse 51. Then he, that's Jesus, went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother, look at that phrase, kept all of these things in her heart. Now, what's going on? When we hear Luke 2, we think Christmas story, but in reality, there's 12 years. The first 12 years of Jesus' earthly life and ministry are contained in this one chapter. So his birth, we start with that in verse 1 of chapter 2. By the time you get to verse 21, Jesus is 8 days old. And then, by the time you get to verse 41, Jesus is 12 years old. And at 12 years old, Jesus, as being part of a Jewish family, it was expected, unless there was some sort of providential hindrance, you were expected every year to make your way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover festival. And Mary and Joseph would have with Jesus, and then the children that were born unto Mary after the birth of Jesus, they would have made their way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. But not just them, everybody would have been doing that. Jerusalem was packed on the Passover because every non-sick, non-infirmed Jew would have been there. It was that important. This was obligatory type of worship. And so when Jesus is 12, they leave Nazareth and head to Jerusalem. But they certainly didn't travel by themselves. They would have gone as part of a caravan of stacks of other people from Nazareth. And so probably extended family and people in the neighborhood. And I'm sure there were multiplied groups from Nazareth, but it's likely that they could have been traveling in a group that would have numbered in the hundreds of people. And if that's the case, well, you've had enough time with family. This is a good opportunity to hang out with some of your friends. And so maybe the guys were hanging out with the guys, and the women with the women, and the kids with the kids, and maybe the boys with the boys, and the girls with the girls. Anyway, they travel to Jerusalem, and they're probably separated as they travel. They are there in Jerusalem for the celebration of the Passover festival, so they're there for about a week, and then it's time to head back home. And as they head back home, they're going to head back likely the same way that they traveled, as part of a caravan. Big group of people. And so they leave Jerusalem, and Mary and Joseph, in their minds, they're certain. They've seen Jesus that morning. They said, hey, it's time to go back home. And as the group begins to leave, the assumption is, oh, Jesus is with us. And so they have been traveling an entire day, walking an entire day. When it's time to stop for the night, to bed down, at that point, people would have separated into their own family groups. And at this point, we don't know exactly how it went. Maybe Joseph was the first to say, or Mary was the first to say, but one of them said, have you seen Jesus? No. You haven't seen him? No. I saw him this morning. They started asking around, have you seen Jesus? No. Have you seen Jesus? Going to some of Jesus' friends. Going to some others that they had traveled with. And no one has seen Jesus. And you can imagine the sick feeling that they have at this point. And they realize we've left, and Jesus never left with us. But they've traveled an entire day, so it takes an entire day's travel to get back to Jerusalem. And then it seems that it takes some time on the third day before they finally find Jesus. When they find Jesus, where do they find him? They find him in the temple, and we're told in verse 46, after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. So he's engaging in dialogue with those that are much older than him. And it's not simply that he is asking things. It's clear that he is saying things as well, because verse 47 says, and all those who heard him were astounded at his understanding and answers. Jesus is enlightening those that are much older, that have been formally trained, that this shouldn't be coming from a 12-year-old, but it was. And so at that point, are Mary and Joseph just beaming with pride? Oh, look at our... No, they're ready to kill him. I mean, honestly, it's a wonder that Jesus' crucifixion did not happen in Luke 2. I mean, they are furious. And they saw him, they were astonished, and his mother, and she says, Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. For 3 days, we had no idea where you were. We've been scared to death. And so I think they're ready to wring Jesus' neck, and Jesus' response was, why were you searching for me? The CSB says, didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house? King James renders it, didn't you know that I had to be about my Father's business? On the surface, that sounds like, perhaps, that's a smart aleck response. Until you pay attention to verse 51. Jesus went with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. I think Luke is intentional in communicating. Jesus was not seeking to be disrespectful. He was not seeking to be dishonoring. He was not seeking to be a smart aleck. He wasn't trying to earn himself a fat lip from Joseph. But rather, he was just telling him, hey, I need you to remember. I need you to remember that I'm here on a mission. And my mission is not to be a 12-year-old kid. My mission is to be about my Father's business. I have been sent here on and for a purpose. And with all of this, we get again to verse 51. And what happens? Mary kept all of these things in her heart. This is not earth-shattering, but it is, as a student of Scripture, something that you should pay attention to. If phrases, particularly unusual phrases, are used repeatedly, especially in short proximity, you ought to note that. Twice in one chapter, we have Mary holding on to or treasuring something. But there's a difference between the things that she treasures. In the first case, in the first instance, she is treasuring what the shepherds have said about Jesus. So in that instance, she's holding on to what other people have said about Jesus. But then in the second instance, what is she treasuring? She's treasuring her own experience with Jesus. Again, why is it that we hold on to things? We hold on to things that have value and use. In this instance, she is holding on to, she is clinging to, she is treasuring, intentionally trying to make a mile marker out of the experience of Jesus having made clear that He was here on purpose, that He was here for a purpose, doing His Father's work. That would be part of, I believe, the stuff that would have been deposited in the well that she would draw from later. Not in Luke 2, but in Luke 23. At this point, Jesus is in His early 30s, and Mary watches and listens as Jesus says something in her presence. Actually, He says something in her presence for the last time. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And Luke says that He took His last breath as He was then hanging, dying on a cross. I've got to think that it was not simply what had been said about Jesus to Mary in the past, but it was also her own experiences with Jesus in the past that prepared her to be able to understand, or at least better understand, the experiences she would have with Jesus in the future. Let me see if I can make that very plain. I believe in part that what happens when Jesus is hanging on the cross, I believe part of that, as though and as certainly as tragic and as heart-wrenching and as gut-wrenching as this would have been for Mary to watch and observe, I've got to think that on that day that He was crucified, in part what she saw made more sense because she held on to her experience when Jesus was 12. When He told her, listen, I have to be about my Father's work. I am here on purpose. And then the last thing that she hears Him say is, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, which is to say, the purpose has been accomplished. Mission, task accomplished. Work is done. So what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with you? I think it's a very simple lesson. It is absolutely the case that we need to treasure and we need to hold on, not simply what God has said to us about Jesus' coming into the world and about Jesus, not just the things that we've heard in His Word, but things that other people have said about Jesus because of their years of experience with Him. We need to pay attention to that. And we need to say, that stuff matters. But we need to make sure also that what matters to us is that we have our own experiences with Him that we are logging and that we are taking note of, because I'm telling you, this walk with the Lord is progressive. And I believe there are things that He leads me to experience now that prepare me for the experiences I'm going to have and the experiences I'm going to have with Him in the future. And He's letting me in on this stuff now so that hopefully as I get further down the road, that stuff makes a bit more sense and the pieces of the puzzle start more to line up. When I was in 7th grade, the math class I was taking was pre-algebra, and that was a turning point for me with respect to math. The first, and it was the case in two ways. In the first place, it was when my parents made very clear to me, from now on, if you have any problems with math, we can't help you. And so they said that you're kind of on your own. It was also the first time I remember thinking, when in the world are you going to use this stuff? When in the world are you going to use this stuff? And I promise you, I remember vividly thinking, as a 12th grader sitting in a calculus class, remembering, when in the world are you going to use this? And then I'm thinking, sitting in that calculus class, oh, now is when I use it. I needed that then to prepare me for this now. As I said, I believe that our walk with the Lord in many ways is much the same way, and that He gives us, in part, experiences in the present because those are preparing us for experiences in the future. Mary, twice we're told she treasured some stuff. She held on to some stuff with regard to the coming of Jesus. She held on to what had been said about Him, but then she treasured her own experiences with Him. What's going to be the standout for you? When you think about Christmas and when you think about that it is, in fact, Jesus coming into the world, what is it that's a standout? Is it your own version of the Keystone XR308 110 camera with built-in flash and telephoto zoom? Is it your Red Ryder BB gun? At the end of the day, all the stuff we're not going to hold on to. But we better hold on to some stuff that matters, stuff that we can use, stuff that has value. And what has value is what has been said about Him. What has value are the experiences you're having with Him, even in this season of life right now. It's entirely possible that the circumstances you are facing right now are ones where you are sitting there with a question mark above your head thinking, why in the world is this happening? Hey God, are you paying any attention? Why am I going through this? This is horrible. This is tragic. This is heart-wrenching. This is nerve-wracking. This is all of these things. But I'm telling you, your walk with the Lord is progressive, and He is leading you to experience some things with Him now that will cause the future experiences with Him, I believe, to make more sense. What are you treasuring? What are you hanging on to with regard to Jesus coming into the world? Will you bow your heads with me?